Hey, Dustin, this one's for you. Wow, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. That's all I got. There's nothing even to wow about. I'm the above average comedian, Dan Calachico. You're listening to HIAC Talk Radio. Follow me on Twitter, DanLo83, and the HIAC Talk Radio network, wherever it exists right now in the echo chamber of the internet, on social media, HIAC Talk Radio, Facebook, Twitter, all the good stuff. The Stadium Journey podcast, the Obey the Puck Hockey podcast, it's all there. The Pro Wrestling podcast. 432 episodes so far. We'll see how many more we can do, but it's all there. Just type in HIAC Talk Radio. I already said who I was. Never mind. I'm going to Craig. Craig is also with me. Holy Jesus. Where can people follow you, Craig?
Well, I am Dan Calachico, filling in for Craig Lagans.
Oh, God.
And I only have the one podcast here on the HIAC Talk Radio. And you can follow me, because I am Craig Lagans, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter, at I am Craig Lagans, CraigLiggeons.
NS. It's an easy name, even though people apparently make that more difficult.
Yes, if I had $1 for every time someone misspelled or mispronounced my name, I'd have a very weird job.
You can finally be the gigolo and get paid for it.
Yes, about time.
Hell yeah. None of that date paying for crap. You're getting paid.
Exactly. It'd be the American Gigolo.
American Gigolo. It's like GIF. Or GIF.
Yes.
You know what? We're going to start the show off with you, sir. There's a couple things to talk about modern wrestling, but it won't take as long as the wrestling's past. So we'll start with you this week, sir.
We're gonna go forward in this show by going back, ladies and gentlemen. This was an historic week in the history of professional wrestling. I'm going to bring up several dates in this past week that are still, the ramifications are still being felt in today's professional world of sports entertainment. But what happened this week still resonates, and we're going to go through it step by step on this historic edition of Wrestling Historian. So, listeners, please walk back with me to a time where territories were king, when there were only 3 major wrestling organizations. We're back to a time where titles were called belts, and sports entertainment was professional wrestling. We start on the date of this nation's birthday, July 4th. July 4th, 1974, in Wildwood, New Jersey. Bruno Sammartino pinned Nikolai Volkov, but the important thing that happened that day was making his ring announcing debut was one Gary Michael Capetta. Or as Jesse Ventura affectionately referred to him as Gary Michael Kapetsky. So he made his ring announcing debut, 4th of July in 1974. 502 miles away, Dan, on that exact same day, while Gary Michael Kapetsky was making his first appearance as a ring announcer, in Charlotte, North Carolina, Paul Jones and Bobby Bruggers lost the Mid-Atlantic Tag Team Championship to Rip Hawk and Ric Flair.
Wow.
Ric Flair, July 4th, 1974, won his first ever championship.
That's insane. Wow.
On the same day that Gary Michael Capetta made his debut as a ring announcer, Ric Flair won his first ever championship, the Mid-Atlantic Tag Team title with Rip Hawk. That same day, July 4th, 1982, is a big day in professional wrestling history, Dan, because July 4th, 1982, the aforementioned Ric Flair, who won his first title in 1974, by 1982, he was the NWA Heavyweight Champion. And on this date, July 4th, 1982, the NWA champion Ric Flair took on the WWF heavyweight champion Bob Backlund. In an NWA stronghold in the Omni in Atlanta on the 4th of July, the NWA champion took on the WWF heavyweight champion. In what would be the last time that the NWA champion would take on the WWF champion. There had been 5 Super Bowls of wrestling where the WWF champion took on the NWA heavyweight title champion in a title unification match, and Bob Backlund had been part of 4 of them. Well, this was the last time. What was special about that card, not only that there was a title unification main event, but stars from the WWF wrestled stars of the NWA. Most notably, Jimmy Snuka, who was the #1 heel at the time in the WWF, wrestled Paul Orndorff, who was the top contender for the Georgia Heavyweight Championship in the NWA. Make it even more ironic, Paul Orndorff and Jimmy Snuka were former NWA Tag Team Champions. On that same card, the Samoans, who were coming off a WWF Tag Team title reign, took on the Fabulous Freebirds, who were the National Tag Team Champions in the NWA. They went to a double disqualification. Ivan Putski also wrestled, took on Ivan Putski and Tommy Rich. Well, Tom Pritchard took on Ole Anderson and Stan Hansen.
Jeez.
So there was, and that would be the last time that WWF wrestlers wrestled NWA stars in an NWA territory. But title unification, the last Super Bowl of wrestling between the WWF and the NWA, Ric Flair wrestled Bob Backlund to a double countout. Wow. That same day, staying on July 4th, Dan, 5 years later, July 4th, 1987, and we're back in the Omni 5 years later for the Great American Bash and the debut of Dusty Rhodes' American Dream. July 4th, 1987 was the debut of the War Games.
The match beyond.
The 4 Horsemen, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Lex Luger, and J.J. Dillon took on Dusty Rhodes, Nikita Koloff, the Road Warriors, and Paul Ellering in the first ever War Games match. And it was a debut for the ages because not only did Nikita Koloff get a spike pile driver that ruptured the disc in his neck, J.J. Dillon suffered a separated shoulder after taking the Doomsday device from the Road Warriors.
Yeah.
There was injuries galore. Big Bubba Rogers wound up taking JJ's place under a mask, calling himself the War Machine. But that first, and Nikita was ineffective for most of the. He sat out for a lot of those War Games matches, and I think Magnum TA took his. Magnum didn't. Dick Murdoch took his place in a couple of the War Games. But that was the first War Games took place 4th of July 1987 in the Omni in Atlanta.
They do not make them like they used to.
They do not. NXT probably came the closest to recreating that magic when they had NXT War Games earlier this year, but nothing compared with those matches and just that debut because it was unlike anything any wrestling fan had ever seen.
The 97 and 98 War Games were pretty bad.
Yeah.
And in 99, unfortunately, they dropped it at that point. It was just Fall Brawl. And I'll never forget tuning into Fall Brawl. And it didn't occur to me going into the show, they didn't announce any War Games match, and it didn't occur to me it means it's not going to happen. But it occurred to me, as soon as the show started, it was just that weird Fall Brawl text with the video board in the letters that year. I'm like, oh, this sucks. The only thing good about the 99 show was the thing I always mention, and then I'll get back onto the finishing point. Believe it or not, I haven't forgotten about the War Games. is that was the fall brawl in 99 where Sting finally turned on Hogan.
Yeah.
Red and yellow Hogan was back, and it was like, if you turn, Sting's like, you turn on me again, I swear to God, I'm going to kill you. And at the end of the night, it was Sting that turned on Hogan, and the exact reaction that any rational person would think would happen. And instead of everybody booing Sting and the heel turn working, they were all like, yes, finally, you hit the son of a bitch. And everybody cheered when he beat the hell out of him with a baseball bat. And they still went with heel Sting coming at the Metallica. Nobody was going to cheer for Hogan in that company against Sting. And they didn't. And Sting cut one of his better promos as a heel once, and it was pretty much a waste, and they just kind of dropped it real quickly, and he never got the reactions back. But back to the War Games thing is, they did fine after NWA dropped and it was WCW. They were still good War Games, but those last two, the first NWO one, 96, of course, is history making with the fake Sting and the real Sting coming out at the end too. One of the loudest pops you'll ever hear when people realize, and then 97 was okay, and that was the real gnarly looking Ric Flair cage slamming door on his head. Well, come to think of it, yes, exactly, the Kerry Von Erich Michael Hayes slam, yeah. And 98's just stupid. 98 was just stupid. Past the guy who won, which was DDP, right, which led to the match of the year, arguably, DDP and Goldberg at Halloween Havoc. That match is garbage. I will throw that in now that I've said that. 95 is pretty stupid too, where they debut the Giant as Andre's son. He looks just like him, and he hops over the ring and just snaps Hogan's neck. Yeah, that was a pretty bad War Games too, but. For a couple of years now, WCW did the name well, and then
they had a good run. I think that my favorite War Games though was Capital Combat 1990 with the Midnight Express, the Road Warriors, and Dr. Death versus the Freebirds and the Samoan SWAT team.
It's hard for me to argue with you on that one. Sting Squadron for selfish reasons I like.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's hard for me to debate you. So I'll just go, yes, Mr. Historian, you are correct.
But it all started. They had a good run, but it started 4th of July, 1987. 4th of July is a landmark date because not only were there great historic firsts, but there was also some tragedy on this date. I don't know why this happens on 4th of July, but the very next year, 4th of July, July 4th, 1988, we lost Adrian Adonis.
Oh, Jesus.
In a car accident in Newfoundland. He was driving in a car and with the Alaskans, the tag team, one of the great Pacific Northwest tag team, and Mark the Wildman Jackson and Adrian Adonis. Pat of the Kelly twins went to swerve to avoid a deer, and the entire van flipped down an embankment, killing everyone in the car except the driver. Oh. And we lost Adrian Adonis, 4th of July, 1988. July 4th, 1990 was the date that Brutus the Barber Beefcake had his face crushed in a parasailing accident.
Oh, my God. Oh.
He was on the beach, and a person was taking off in a parasailing, and I guess he didn't see Brutus, and Brutus didn't see the guy. Both knees slammed into Brutus's face. Oh. He suffered a crushed nose. He had his jaws wired shut, 8 steel plates, 40 screws, and more than 100 staples were surgically inserted into his face. He wouldn't, but miraculously enough, he would return to the ring in 1993. And he, in fact, was at SummerSlam that year in Philadelphia in August. There, but he had his face-crushing parasailing accident, 4th of July, 1990.
Aren't you glad that they didn't use that. You know how they use Luger's
Steel plate, yeah.
the steel plate of
forearm.
Luger's arms. They didn't just make Brutus Beefcake's finisher the face smash.
Or the bionic headbutt.
Boom.
Yeah. He's down. He's out. July 4th, 1991, Dr. George Zaharian was found guilty of 12 counts of selling steroids and controlled substances.
That was the Vince is going to go to jail. Jerry Jarrett's going to be in charge trial, isn't it?
Yeah, that was when he was indicted. He was found guilty July 4th, 1991. Vince is coming up later on in the historian, but this was the first domino to fall, where Dr. George Zaharian, who the name I only know because he was introduced before every wrestling match when I watched Championship Wrestling from the WWF, and the ring announcer Joe McHugh would introduce all the officials at ringside, and the doctor at ringside, Dr. George Zaharian. Apparently, Dr. George Zaharian had been selling steroids and controlled substance without medical approval to many wrestlers, including Hulk Hogan, who denied any steroid use at all. But 4th of July, 1991, he was sent up the river. July 4th, 1993, Dan, we go to the USS Intrepid in the Bay of New York for the Yokozuna Body Slam Challenge. Set up professional athletes and wrestlers alike would all take turns putting their hands in between Yokozuna's legs and trying to lift him up. Among the participants who grabbed Yokozuna under his junk in an attempt to elevate him, Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner, Bob Backlund, Tatanka, Peter Tagliente from the Pittsburgh Penguins, Bill Fralick from the Detroit Lions, Scott Brown from the Charlotte Hornets, and even the Macho Man Randy Savage came out from behind the booth to attempt to lift Yokozuna, all to no avail until, look, up in the sky. It's a helicopter, and out comes a heel Lex Luger with Bobby Heenan in tow trying to talk Luger out of it. Luger shoves Heenan aside, and with his red, white, and blue Zubaz, climbs into the ring, strips off his shirt, stands face to face with Yokozuna, hits him with the metallic forearm with the plate surgically implanted from his motorcycle incident, and gives Yokozuna the hip toss seen round the world, and slams the near 600-pound Japanese Samoan to the ground. And the formerly heel Lex Luger is saluted with a hero's welcome placed upon the shoulders of his fellow wrestlers. And that body slam, if you will, of Yokozuna would ignite and gas up the Lex Express, the single biggest push of anyone in WWF, nay, professional wrestling history. But it started 4th of July, 1993, with the body slam of Yokozuna.
I found Peter Taglianetti on Twitter, actually.
Yeah?
Well, of course, you mentioned a hockey player, and it piqued my interest, and I don't remember that name, and I had to see it. Okay, I know that guy. Yeah, I don't know. I was just a little tidbit. That was me chiming in again.
Yeah, but there was a whole list of athletes, but I put him on the list because he was a hockey player, and I know that would pique your interest. Yeah. But a lot of the football players I never heard of outside of Bill Fralick.
Sims.
Yeah, and I vaguely knew Scott Brown from the Hornets.
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't know anybody else.
Yeah, me neither.
Probably for the best.
But I had to put the hockey player in there for you, Dan.
Thank you.
And finally, on July 4th, date which will live in infamy. There's so many good things and so many tragedies. Yeah. July 4th, 1994 was the death of Joey Marella, one of the great referees in WWF history. He refereed the the Randy Savage Ricky Steamboat match at WrestleMania 3. Refereed a lot of the great matches. The son of Gorilla Monsoon, and died in a car accident. And Bobby Heenan said it. Gene Okerlund said it. Gorilla was never the same after that. And how could you be? Parents shouldn't have to bury their kids under any circumstances. But yeah, so July 4th, all that happened on the 4th of July. So that was one hell of a date. Until we get to July 5th. July 5th, 1982 was a curious date. Stan Lane and Ron Bass on July 5th, 1982 won the AWA Southern Tag Team Championship from the Midnight Express. And this was the Midnight Express that had Dennis Condrey and Norvell Austin. So Stan Lane, who would be a future member of the Midnight Express, actually defeated the Midnight Express to win one half of the Southern Tag Team Championship.
What the what?
July 5th, 1986, the Great American Bash at Charlotte Stadium. Dan, you're going to notice the theme here with because we're in Bash Week here. But on July 5th, 1986, the Great American Bash at Charlotte Stadium. Listen to the list of all these gimmick matches that took place on this night. Manny Fernandez beat Baron von Raschke in a bunkhouse match. Wahoo McDaniel beat Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin in an Indian strap match. Ronnie Garvin knocked out Tully Blanchard in a tape fist match. The Road Warriors beat the Koloffs in a Russian chain match. Jimmy Valiant beat Pez Shaska Watley in a hair versus hair match.
Who?
Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, and Baby Doll beat the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette in a steel cage match. And Ric Flair defeated Ricky Morton in yet another steel cage match. That was all on one card, outdoors, folks, in Charlotte Stadium. That was the Great American Bash, July 5th, 1986. Staying on that day, July 5th, 1993, a reversal of fortune. Jerry Lawler defeated Owen Hart for the USWA Unified Heavyweight Championship. A reversal of fortune because Jerry Lawler was a heel in the WWF at the time, and Owen Hart was a babyface. But this match took place in Memphis. So guess what? Jerry Lawler was the face, and Owen Hart was the heel. But Jerry Lawler defeated Owen Hart for the USWA Heavyweight title. July 5th, 1993. And July 5th, 1994. Dan, I told you we'd get back to it. July 5th, 1994 was day one of the trial of Vince McMahon.
Do it in the summer where it's real hot and everybody's uncomfortable in the courtroom. That's what I say.
Yes, and especially knowing that Vince is going to wear a three-piece suit everywhere he goes. So that's going to be definitely.
And a neck brace was a nice touch. Oh, my neck hurt so much.
Yeah, they had the Andy Kaufman diagnosis. July 6th. We're on to July 6th. July 6th, 1983. Ric Flair wrestled Harley Race twice for the NWA Heavyweight title on the same day.
Whoa.
In the afternoon matinee, he wrestled Harley Race to a disqualification in Sumter, South Carolina. And that night, he wrestled Harley Race to a double disqualification in Greenville, South Carolina. So he had not one, but two chances at the NWA title against Harley Race on the same day. July 6, 1985, Tito Santana defeated Greg Valentine for the Intercontinental Heavyweight title in a cage. That would be the first time the Intercontinental title had ever changed hands in a cage. And Tito Santana became only the second two-time winner of the Intercontinental title. But it was the first time it ever changed hands in a cage. That same day, July 6, 1985, 444 miles away in Charlotte, North Carolina, Dan, was the very first Great American Bash at Charlotte Stadium. 25,000 fans in attendance for the very first Great American Bash. So big that the NWA Tag Team Champions, Ivan and Nikita Koloff, took on the AWA Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, in their first ever meeting. with both teams being world champions. This is back when the territories were still a thing, but the AWA still could wrestle in the NWA. And the Road Warriors were so insanely popular that they could pretty much write their own ticket. So the AWA Tag Team Champions wrestled on an NWA card. Also, Ric Flair took on Nikita Koloff with David Crockett as the referee. And Dusty Rhodes defeated Tully Blanchard for the NWA Television Championship inside a steel cage. But this was in 1985 when wrestling was king, so this is 2 months after WrestleMania when the WWF business was skyrocketing, but the wrestling business itself was also skyrocketing because there was 25,000 fans in Charlotte Stadium to watch the first ever Great American Bash. July 6th, staying on that date, 1997, was the WWF Canadian Stampede pay-per-view that took place in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Some would say maybe the greatest WWF pay-per-view or one of the greatest WWF pay-per-views of all time. One of the main events on the card, the WWF champion, The Undertaker, defeated Vader. That was a match that I thought Vader might actually go over because the match took place in Canada. But even though we talked before about Jerry Lawler being a heel in WWF but a face in Memphis, well, the Hart Foundation were heels in United States, but since this pay-per-view took place in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, the Hart Foundation, the team of Bret Hart, Owen Hart, Jim Neidhart, Davey Boy Smith, and Brian Pillman defeated the team of Ken Shamrock, Goldust, Animal and Hawk, and Stone Cold Steve Austin when Owen pinned Austin. So the Team Canada contingent that were got a huge hand, were huge faces, defeated the five-man team of Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock, Goldust, and the Legion of Doom. And on that same date, July 6, 1998, Dan, the largest crowd in WCW history, a Monday Nitro, the Georgia Dome, 41,412 strong, watched the United States Heavyweight Champion, Bill Goldberg, defeat Hulk Hogan for the WCW Heavyweight Championship. Your remembrance of that day, sir?
As a kid, it was awesome.
Yeah.
And see, you can't talk about it. As a kid, it was like, yes, thank you. I can't believe this is happening because, at that point, I was watching every wrestling show that aired on television: Shotgun, Metal, Jacked,
Right.
Heat, Thunder,
Access.
Saturday Night, Nitro, the Pro, Worldwide was Cindy. You see, I in our area, we've talked about it before. Talk about it again because I like talking about the history of wrestling and how big it is in Philly. Most of everything I like seems to have a Philly contingency. The band Genesis are synonymous with the 70s and 80s of WMMR in Philadelphia. That's just the way it is. The Spectrum in the Veterans Stadium is featured in their Three Sides Live documentary live show. Wrestling has a huge, talking out of my ass here, everybody knows this, who's listening to this show, has a huge life in Philadelphia and the South Jersey area. And at one point, Jesus Christ, in the mid-90s, we could watch all those shows.
Yeah.
Before the internet, before you could legally stream or just sign up for a service, because WGTW, Channel 19, Wilmington, would air these shows. And all out ECW was on there. NWA Fireside was on there. Wildside? I forget the name of the show. Wildside, right? There was other indie shows that were on there. Pro, Worldwide, Jack, Metal, Shotgun Saturday, all on WGTW, and then you had USA, TNT, TBS. And I went off on a tangent. I just like talking about that history because there'd be like 17 shows a week of wrestling you would watch. They announced it on Thunder. This is like the good. It's good from good to bad. I'm going to say from good to bad. They announced it on Thunder. Goldberg's gonna JJ with that acid-eating grin on his face against who I feel is the actual number one contender, Bill Goldberg, and then it went from selling 40,000 to 60,000 seats or 50,000. So like it sold so many more tickets based on that. Hogan comes out on Nitro and says, you got to still jump through hoops. You got to wrestle Scott Hall. He beats Scott Hall. The main event goes off. He pins him with an actually decent performance from Hogan. Yeah. I still say, obviously he had great matches as Hulk Hogan, but some of his better work was as a heel because he didn't have to be the face and wrestle. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just feel he was better that way, but that's just me. How dare I speak negatively of Hollywood Hulk Hogan? Excuse me, I would never speak negatively of Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan is a piece of crap. But retrospectively, of course, it sucks. Because they had 5 days. They announced it, and the match was going on 5 days. They did it on free on TV.
Yeah.
And it was it. It was over. And then you get what? And then you get what? Well, then what you get is a shock stick and Starrcade 98. That's what you get. The end game. Now, I'm one of those guys that I'm not amused by the finger poke. I'm not amused by the I side on the I get why they did those things.
Mm-hmm.
I get why that you asked the question, I'm going around for a long version of the answer. I get why they did those things to Bill. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I agree with Bobby Heenan. Never should have lost. Ever should have lost a match. You can end in a DQ at Starrcade and then find out that Nash is somehow part of the NWO again and do it that way. There's no way Nash should have won that match. There's no way he should have ever been defeated. Not for a couple years. No. So, like, when you go back and watch that stuff, which I have, it makes sense why they do it. Mm-hmm. Like, certain people aren't there anymore. You need this big heel machine against Goldberg. Reform the NWO. Stick with what you know.
Yeah.
But that was the problem. It all led to that downfall, which led to another downfall, which led to another downfall, which led to the end. But I can't ever emphasize whether you like Goldberg or not. And I mean, generally speaking, not you, Craig. I mean, those who are listening, whether you like Goldberg or not, he was the guy. As much as I love Sting and Ric Flair, Goldberg was the guy. You had a guy that was homegrown, that you didn't pluck from WWE, that you didn't, screw up with WCW, send to WWE, and then bring him back over, Holland Nash. You had the guy that you built on your own. We had two. You had Giant and Goldberg.
Right.
And you did it for free.
Yeah.
On Nitro. And you did it for ratings. You didn't look at the big picture. A multi-billion-dollar company that owned the multi-million-dollar company couldn't look at the big picture and go, giving this away for free is stupid. It's almost suicide. Let's advertise it for a month, or let's advertise it for the summer pay-per-view after Road Wild, because screw Road Wild. The end of summer. Fall Brawl.
Yeah.
Something. Giving it away for Nitro, I will always defend to the end that it was the stupidest goddamn thing I'd ever seen. And then, I mentioned the finger poke. What building did that happen in? The Georgia Dome. Right back. You literally sold almost as many tickets for them to see Nash and Hogan, and then you did the finger poke. Never should have Goldberg lost. Him not losing, I believe, still saves that angle.
Yeah. and still say and could save WCW.
You asked I can't answer how awesome it was without talking about how awesome it wasn't, because it was. It was a big moment. Hogan finally went down. That place went effing insane. The dome flew off the top of that building.
I wanted to speak to a couple of your points you made about them being short-sighted, and especially with Goldberg. Bobby Heenan brought this up while he was still with the company. Things that they missed out on, or that they were short-sighted with. One of the I forget, the quarterback won the the Sugar Bowl, and he asked Eric Bischoff if he could wear an NWO shirt, and Bischoff said no. And the guy wound up winning the national championship, and he was on camera the whole time, and he could have been wearing an NWO shirt. Blew that opportunity. They showed a picture, a caption of David Arquette in the audience with Courtney Cox. Courtney Cox is on the #1 show on Earth, Friends. They could have talked to her and saying how Nitro is the place to be. Blew that. Goldberg when they went to St. Louis.
Oh yeah,
Mark McGuire was rubbing his bat on Goldberg, and Mark McGuire goes out and hits 70 home runs that year. We found out years later that it was aided and it was an asterisk, but still, they skipped that part. ER contacted Goldberg about appearing on their show. I mentioned Friends before, but ER was the #1 drama on TV. WCW said no. They brought in another actor and called him Kornberg. He looked just like Goldberg, and it's like, why couldn't Goldberg have done that? And you promote Goldberg being on the #1 show on television, because Bill Goldberg, like you said, was homegrown, but he was the biggest star in wrestling, maybe comparable to Rock, if not more than Austin. And he was homegrown, and they blew it so many different times. And you said they did it for ratings. Yeah, I have the ratings right here. That night, July 6, 1998, when Goldberg won the championship, they got a 4.93 rating. That same day, Raw did a 4.0.
Yeah, not good
so
enough.
It's not like they crushed them.
No, not good enough.
No, not good enough. And Raw's main event was Undertaker versus Kane and Mankind in a handicap match. So you gave away your #1 match for free, and it wasn't even a ratings juggernaut.
I wanted to add to the St. Louis, the Mark McGuire Goldberg thing, what Bobby harped on. Maybe it was after he left, because you indicated he mentioned it during, but especially after, what he mentioned was, if that was Austin and the WWE, there would have been 30 cameras there capturing every angle, every moment of that moment, and you had a picture that you didn't get published in the magazine until a month after.
Yeah.
That's my loaded question. Your answer to your question about how Goldberg, and I'm sure that's what you're going for.
I just wanted your memory of that night, July 6, 1998.
Jesus Christ, my memory was going yay, and then turning it off and going to sleep. That's my memory.
Okay, we'll turn the page. July 7th, 1977. I spoke about these two guys last week on Historian. Well, the summer or the month of July has been very good to this tag team. On July 7th, 1977, Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell defeated Blackjack Lanza and Bobby Duncombe to win the AWA Tag Team Championship. It was the first time they'd won the AWA Tag Team title, and Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell would go on to hold the AWA Tag Team title, the longest reigning AWA Tag Team champions in history. Longer than Bockwinkel and Stevens, longer than Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson. Arguably the greatest babyface tag team, the greatest babyface tag team in AWA history. But it started, their first reign was July 7th, 1977. I remember reading this in my After magazines, because even though I had never seen them wrestle, Gagne and Brunzell, just from reading the magazines and looking at the pictures, I know they were a good young team on the rise, and I was rooting for them. When they lost to Angelo Mosca in the Spoiler, I felt bad for them, because I hope they get another shot. And they did it. July 7th, 1997. I'm sorry, July 7th, 1977. Gagne and Brunzell win their first AWA Tag Team Championship. Staying on that date, July 7th, 1990. the Great American Bash pay-per-view. And now I know you know exactly where you were when this happened. And when I go to you for your memories, and hopefully it will be as long as your Goldberg memories.
No.
But Great American Bash pay-per-view in Baltimore, Maryland, 1990. One of the Big Van Vader defeated Tom Zank in about 2 minutes. This will be Vader's American wrestling debut.
Oh, wow.
And his WCW debut, but this was his first match, his first pay-per-view in America as Van Vader.
I know that.
Yeah, defeated Tom Zank in 2 minutes. The United States champion Lex Luger defeated Mean Mark Callis with a clothesline in under 5 minutes. Mean Mark Callis managed by Paul E. Dangerously. And he had a great video package before the match. That's what I remember most. But he wound up losing to Luger in under 5 minutes. Blasphemy. But 6 months later, he would be coming out of an egg. So I think he's okay.
Yeah, that's true.
The United States Tag Team Championship, the Midnight Express defeated the Wild Eyed Southern Boys, Tracy Smothers and Steve Armstrong, in a match of the year candidate, and one of the matches that Jim Cornette still calls one of the greatest matches he's ever been a part of, when the Midnight Express defeated the Southern Boys. And on this day, July 7th, 1990, Sting would defeat Ric Flair to win his first World Heavyweight Championship.
You have to understand, folks. You have to understand that this was months, if not years. Well, it's definitely years, but it was months in the making from Sting's knee injury. Thank you, Doug Dillinger. To him coming back and finally, the guy who had been pounding on him off and on for over a year and a half, 2 years at that point. The man who Rick made Sting a star in one night.
Yeah.
At the Clash.
At the very, very first Clash of Champions.
End of story. And for those who were like, I can't watch old wrestling matches, watch that match and defy me to say it's not as good as anything that would be considered a classic to this day. Because you'd be wrong. 100% wrong. Learn the term Broadway. Okay? And then come back to me. The match is phenomenal. And this match is great. You had the underlying story of Sting with his bad knee, and you had Ric Flair being Ric goddamn Flair. And you had I've been to the arena since. It's so funny because I remember sitting in the living room watching that and just screaming when he finally did that. Inside cradle, yes! That was it. That was the call. Ric Flair had him, went for the figure four. We've seen it many times since. You saw it once or twice before, but you've seen it more since. But it was still a rare thing for somebody to catch that guy in the middle of the figure four and small package him. Or not small package, but inside cradle. And made him. And he did. And that match is 15, 20 minutes of gold. Mm-hmm. And the loudest I've ever heard a building that I can remember at that age. Now, it come to be that I've finally been to that building for the first... I consider that one of wrestling meccas. I grew up watching that building in NWA, WCW, seen so many cards there and matches there. And then you walk in, you're like, this place is a dump. It's absolute dump. So I can understand why it was so hot and loud in there, because it was literally that loud, hot and loud. But that noise that became so loud it almost became static because of how loud everybody was screaming. Packing that building was packed. You don't see that building packed very often anymore. Mm-hmm. But it just got so loud in there that it almost blended in with the snow, the noise in the back of the cable noise that you used to hear back in the day. And the plethora of wrestlers who came out. One of those matches that wasn't an overbooked WCW cluster F. Somebody tried to come out. Elegante held... who was he holding back
Anderson.
with the...
Ole Anderson.
He was holding back Ole, yeah.
Handcuffed to Ole Anderson.
Yeah, he was handcuffed to him, and he held him back because Ole wasn't dragging that big guy down there. Like, you stay right here. the names that came out. You know what? The dudes with attitudes came out, but the one man I see is Junkyard.
Okay, yeah, he was there.
JYD was there, and I know there was like 10 other guys there, but for some reason, him doing the knee shake against the ropes.
Yeah.
While Sting was congratulating everybody else, sticks in my head. That's my memory, is Sting raising the belt and Junkyard Dog celebrating. He was almost happier than Sting.
But no one was happier than Dan Calachico.
No, there's nobody in the world that was happier than me. And it's funny, I didn't think it was coming. I was like, oh, wait a minute, that happened last week. He's going to bring it up. Yay.
Yes, and something else I brought up this week, because we're celebrating an anniversary of that, your favorite moment in WCW. But on that same date, July 7th, 1996, Bash at the Beach,
that's right.
The aforementioned Sting teamed up with Randy Savage and Lex Luger, all covered in face paint, to take on the team of Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and an opponent to be named later. Bash at the Beach was the name of the pay-per-view. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had debuted in WCW a month earlier, claiming that they were under the guise of being sent from this big company up north to infiltrate and to destroy WCW. But they kept talking about a third member, and they would bring out their third member at Bash at the Beach. They went in 2-on-3, and more than held their own against WCW's best, Randy Savage, Sting, and Lex Luger. And out comes Hulk Hogan to a tremendous pop. And
yeah, but whose side is he on?
And the announce team of Dusty Rhodes, Tony Schiavone, and Bobby Heenan. Now, Bobby Heenan, longtime adversary of Hulk Hogan, both as a work and as a shoot. And to this day, God rest his soul, but Bobby Heenan, in his always annoyance of Hulk Hogan, the one who said, but whose side is he on, is what some would say would ruin the moment.
Oh, fuck.
Some would say, and not me.
Well, those some are wrong. 100%. Just get that's like saying the Earth is round. I mean, flat.
But for many, it was like because he planted that doubt, and obviously we know why he said it, because the whole idea at the time was ludicrous that Hogan would side with these guys, and then Hogan was there to help out his buddies, Sting, Luger, and of course Randy Savage. But came into the ring, Hall and Nash beat a hasty retreat, and then out of nowhere, the leg drop heard round the world on Randy Savage. And every time I look at it, and I look at it over and over again, because this is my favorite moment in WCW history, I look at the crowd in stunned silence and in shock. Some of the marks started to cheer, but at the same time, this was still a huge, huge blow. Out goes Randy, don't call me Pee Wee Anderson. Another leg drop to Randy Savage. In comes Hall and Nash, and the boos rained down. And then Hulk Hogan gave possibly the single best promo of his career, even though it's hard to believe he had been doing it for more than 15 years at this point, giving promos from the halcyon days of WWF. But he said, you know something, Mean Gene? You gotta, first of all, Mean Gene, you gotta tell these people to shut up if they want to hear what I gotta say. And that was the first public Hulk Hogan heel heat that he ever got. Everybody wanted to know who the third man is. These two men came from an organization up north, and everybody wanted to know who the third man was. Well, who knows better about that company up north than me? and proceeded to call, "You can just call this the New World Order of Wrestling." And later on renamed it the New World Organization because he forgot he called it New World Order.
Thank God they didn't keep those names.
Yes, the New World Organization, the New World Order of Professional Wrestling. And that's what started the then weekly showering of debris in the ring. But that's something I never thought I would see. Hulk Hogan in the ring being booed unmercifully and being pelted by garbage. But in the ring with Hall and Nash is one of the most iconic figures in wrestling history. And it started Bash at the Beach, a pay-per-view I didn't get and was not intending to get at all. I only found out the next day and through word of mouth because there was no internet. There was no dirt sheets.
That's amazing.
I didn't believe it. Yeah.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
No.
Couple of points.
Yes.
The Bobby Heenan thing.
Yeah.
Most of what I'm going to say is for a lot of people like, yeah, duh. But I really feel like this should be brought up. Hogan and Bobby was the greatest program in professional wrestling.
Yeah.
Period.
Mm-hmm.
That feud lasted 25 to 30 years.
Yes. From the AWA to the WWF to the WCW.
Period.
Yeah.
Those saying that ruined it, you're like the people that watch Marvel trailers and you post a YouTube video about your thoughts, feelings, and your rumors, and they're 80% incorrect about the trailer because A, they're throwing in fake shots, and B, you're a moron. You're those people that he ruined it. That was a spoiler. He literally, Craig, you said the words, planted that seed of doubt immediately on purpose from the word go. He was suspect of Hogan. That was literally the program he ran every time Hogan was in the ring, and he was either cutting a promo or on commentary. Even though Bobby's disgusting and one of the most vile human beings on earth, I know Hogan is a piece of crap. He's disgusting. He's only in it for himself. He's a vile human being, and I'm telling you this. And in that moment, Bobby Heenan, the character, Bobby the Brain Heenan, was validated.
Yes.
So not only did Bobby stay over, not only did he not ruin a goddamn thing, it literally carried further to where now that Bobby talked about how crappy Hogan was, he was the face.
Yes. And he was the one saying, "I've told you all these years, what have I been saying about Hogan? He was no good. He was only out for himself." And Tony Schiavone had to eat his words. Well, I hate to say you're right, Bobby, but
one of the greatest things I've ever heard. And you will die. Most of us wrestling fans will die hearing the words, "Yeah, but whose side is he on?"
Yeah.
Like, anybody who thinks the otherwise is out of their mind or just being trying to be edgy to be cool. You're wrong. You're just everybody talks about different feuds and matches. Hogan and Bobby was one of the greatest things that lasted for years that not enough people talk about. And there is a perfect opportunity. Literally in that moment, there is the face heel switch before the heel switch. It's just unbelievable. And the other point was Mean Gene cutting his nose open on debris being thrown into the ring.
Yeah.
He's standing there taking shots from everybody while Hogan is literally, as you said, cutting the promo of his life. And we can all talk about how it ended, but for a couple months there, Hollywood Hulk Hogan was the greatest heel in professional wrestling.
That he was. And this is on top of being the greatest face in the history of professional wrestling.
Absolutely.
Okay, not everyone can say that.
Nope.
Maybe Hogan and Piper are probably the only ones that can say they were the biggest face in the world and the biggest heel in the world. And the NWO was the biggest thing in all of professional wrestling. It encompassed, it was a pop culture thing, and to the point where they renamed WCW NWO. But it started with Hogan, and it started at Bash at the Beach. Again, the shots of Hogan, Hall, and Nash in that ring, iconic. And even Hogan grabbing Mean Gene at the end. And what you gonna do when the NWO runs
Don't
wild?
touch
What
me,
you
I
gonna
got a
do,
fleet
Gene?
of
What you gonna
lawyers.
do? He goes, don't touch me, I'll sue. And just him just shaking Gene's jacket. I
Unbelievable.
said, if you want to.
Go ahead, finish. Sorry.
If he wanted real heat, he would have thrown Gene to the ground or something like that. But I know he just because they obviously had been friends for 30 years at that point.
That's another thing. Mean Gene and Hogan were synonymous. Whether you like, and I hate his promos. Whether you liked Hogan or not. Well, let me tell you something, Mean Gene. For 20 years was the thing. Well, at that point, 10, 15 years was the thing.
And it's the triangle, Dan. Gene, Hogan, and Bobby. I mean, from the AWA to the WWF to the WCW, those three were inseparable. When one goes, you find the other.
That moment, without those three, without one of those three, is a different story. Period. End of discussion. You have to have Bobby and you have to have Mean Gene there.
Most definitely, and Bobby and Gene together. I mean, maybe. Indirectly one of the greatest comedy duos in all of entertainment history when you put Bobby and Gene together. But Bobby, Gene, and Hogan, they're interchangeable. But that was the zenith. Took place July 7th, 1996, Bash at the Beach. Bill Simmons, one of the great commentators, even made a mention of it on his short-lived show on HBO. To celebrate the 30th anniversary, and 2 years ago on his show, now Bill Simmons is the guy that interviews LeBron James, interviews Tiger Woods, interviews some of the greatest athletes of all time. But he began his short-lived show on HBO by celebrating the 30th anniversary, the 20th anniversary at the time of Hogan's turn at Bash at the Beach.
So say, don't outage me.
Yeah, sorry, but 2016, 3 years ago, he celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Hogan heel turn.
Unreal.
My favorite moment in WCW history. Going up to July 9th, 1985, the Rock and Roll Express defeated Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev for the NWA Tag Team Championship in their first ever match in the NWA.
Wow.
This was how different wrestling is now compared to them. In 1985, I told you about how huge wrestling was in 1985 for all brands. You had 25,000 in the NWA to watch, and the Hulkamania just was only 3 months old at the time. But MTV was also huge. So wrestlers or producers like Joel Watts, Jim Cornette, Joel Deaton would put together clips, Jerry Lawler, of wrestlers would have videos.
Yeah.
So when wrestling was on cable 13 hours a day from 13 different territories, you could see wrestlers premiere on these shows without wrestling, but you could see their music video because the promoters would put together clips from their matches, set it to today's the hits of then, the hits of the 80s, and make a video because MTV was the biggest thing in the world. So the Rock and Roll Express hadn't wrestled in the NWA, but weeks leading up to it, fans would be showing on Rock and Roll Express videos. Rock and Roll Express matches to the tune of I Want to Rock and Roll All Night by Kiss, or I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett, Rock and Roll is King by ELO. But there would be these video clips, and the Rock and Roll Express is coming. So by the time the Rock and Roll Express, who were coming from the Mid-South, with wrestling, feuding with Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express, by the time they debuted in the NWA, they were already over huge. So when their music hit, fans would go nuts. And they beat Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev, the NWA Tag Team Champions, on their first match and it was on TV, and the match took the entire hour of TV. Jim Cornette alluded to it. You don't have TV like that again. And
Amazing.
to him, I talked about on this show my favorite debuts of all time. Jim Cornette still called that the greatest debut in wrestling history. The Rock and Roll Express had not only never wrestled in the NWA, but their first match was on TV, and it was a title match, and it took up the entire hour. And when they defeated Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev, the fans went crazy. As crazy as when Sting won the NWA Heavyweight Championship. And just like when Sting won the NWA Championship, wrestlers flooded the ring to congratulate Ricky and Robert, who had never wrestled in the NWA before. But July 9th, 1985, the Rock and Roll Express won their first World Tag Team Championship in their first match in the NWA. July 9th, 2000, we go to the most controversial, some would say, pay-per-view in WCW history. Again at Bash at the Beach.
Oh.
4 years later.
Yeah.
You aforementioned, you mentioned when you're in your Goldberg memory of Hogan and Nash and the finger poke at the Georgia Dome. Well, this was the most controversial pay-per-view in WCW history. The match was, and I'm not talking about the Daphne Miss Hancock wedding gown match that I know still sticks in your mind.
Yeah.
But it was the Hulk Hogan Jeff Jarrett match where Jeff Jarrett intentionally laid down and Vince Russo told Hogan to pin him. And Hogan did, rang the bell, and Hogan grabbed the house mic and said, "This is why we can't do business with a BS company like this," and walked out. That same night, Jeff Jarrett was the reigning WCW Heavyweight Champion. He lost that belt later on that night to Booker T.
Thank God.
And Booker T would end the match, would end the night as the WCW Heavyweight Champion. Vince Russo cut a promo talking about how the matches that the wrestlers that should be getting opportunities weren't getting opportunities. Hogan not only left the ring after he pinned, quote, Jeff Jarrett, he left the arena and he left WCW. He was taken off the website, and fans still wonder if it was a work or a shoot. I think everything leading up to Hogan leaving was a work, and what Russo said afterwards, double-crossing him, I think that's what started the shoot.
Yeah.
Now, I've gotten your thoughts on previous matches or moments during this segment of Wrestling Historian, but your thoughts on that match, July 9th, 2000.
My thoughts, well, first of all, it gave us the another match of the year that year because Booker T and Jeff Jarrett was fantastic.
That it was.
And it had to happen because of that, but Booker T finally getting the title was almost as emotional as Sting winning it finally from Flair. And it's because, and this was before the internet and this agenda stuff. It was a guy that I watched as long as I watched Sting, right? Who even at that in 2000 was a tag team legend. Like he had Booker T by 96 had solidified he was going into the Hall of Fame eventually. Booker T and Stevie Ray, Harlem Heat.
Yeah.
And the fact that he just came off GI Bro returning, and which I liked GI Bro. I'll raise my hand and say I liked it. I liked it for what it was. If they went with that longer than the month and a half, and it wasn't part of a storyline, different story. Retrospectively, I like that it was in the middle of the "you made me drop my name, I have to find a new identity, nah, I want Booker back" kind of deal. You get what I mean? I understand why you hated it, but I get it. I'm not saying I'm right. Let's just say that. I did like. I'll be the one to say I didn't like it better, and you can't say Booker's name without hearing the dan-dan-dan-dan-dan-dan, but I liked his revamped theme music that he used for a little while.
Yeah.
I was a big fan of that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a guy you'd watch for so long. Finally, I was TV champ, US champ, tag team champ at the wazoo, and finally getting the big gold belt. Shout out to Big Gold Belt Podcast. It's like the Goldberg thing, because at the time, it's like, fine, great. And then you look at the rest of the year 2000 and how many times that belt changed hands, and it meant almost nothing. I mean, it doesn't mean nothing. He's still the 5-time world champion. 5-time. Did I count wrong? I lost count.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would have liked to seen him carry that company to the end. And he essentially did, but the booking was such a hodgepodge of BS at that point.
Yeah.
That if we just separate that moment and that match past all the other BS that happened on that really awesome pay-per-view, that is moment of the year, because there ain't much left at that point. It really isn't. Booker T winning the championship is that moment. That
it is. And, and Booker T is just in a long line of people. When you see an established tag team, in some cases you just know which guy is the guy. In Harlem Heat, in Hart Foundation, it was Brett. Edge of Christian, it was Edge. And Harlem Heat, it was Booker. He was that guy. Certain teams, they don't stick out. The Midnight Express didn't. Rock and Roll Express, the Dudleys, even though they, some had individual success. But some guys, like that's the guy. Harlem Heat, Booker was the guy. And Hart Foundation, Brett was the guy. It comes in when you see that the guy finally get rewarded for being the guy that we always knew was going to be it. It's very gratifying. So
Hollywood Blondes, you weren't sure who was the guy.
Who?
Hollywood Blondes, you weren't sure.
No, I wasn't sure who the guy. Either one of them could have been the guy.
Yeah.
I was way off on the Rockers because I always thought Marty Jannetty was the guy over Shawn Michaels. Seriously, I thought I always saw the Rockers like the Rock and Roll Express. I was like, you can't make single stars out of either one of these guys.
Yeah.
I thought they got to be a tag team. Same thing with the Midnight Express. I think Bobby Eaton obviously was, maybe the greatest worker of all time, but I know I didn't see him as a world champion. Same thing with Tully and Arn. You don't know. I didn't know either one of them could be the guy, but they were just amazing together. But so that I think that's the only thing that taints Booker T's first ever championship, because it had to come on the heels of a Vince Russo worked shoot. But it happened July 9th, 2000. And today, on this day in professional wrestling history, I just thought it was this little quirk note. Today, in this day in 1967, Tony Altamore and Lou Albano would win the WWF Tag Team Championship. Their tag team, the Sicilians. They came in the ring. They both had these pencil-thin mustaches. They came in with the gangster hats and the white silk scarves. And to the point where the legitimate Italian businessmen kind of either they really resented them, or they saw them as paisans, so they kind of protected them. But still, the Sicilians gimmick was a very shaky ground.
It's the mustache.
Wow.
That's the Italian that I am. When you said mustache, about 3 of my relatives, it went through my head. I'm like, yeah, that's true.
Well, they won their tag team championship. Now, here's a quirky part. That's not even the quirky part of the story, Dan. I haven't even got to the meat of the story. They won the tag team championship from Arnold Skaaland and Chuck Richards. Arnold Skaaland was taking over for filling in because Antonio Puglisi had left the company. And Chuck Richards was a last-minute substitute for that match for Spiros Arion. So the two guys that lost the tag team championship were not the two guys that won the tag team championship. So the Sicilians beat two guys that weren't the tag team champions. Both men were filling in for one wrestler that had left the company and the other wrestler who was injured, taking his place.
The picture, man, that's amazing. These two are amazing. I've never seen this picture.
You didn't know the
no. No,
oh my God.
I'm okay with admitting when I know something and when I don't, and that one skipped me, and I've never seen this, and that is it's the greatest thing I've ever seen, because they look like two grease balls.
I thought you were familiar with the Sicilians, Tony Altamore and Lou Albano.
I'm the world champion.
Were the Sicilians, and they were former WWF Tag Team Champions. But their gimmick, the Sicilians, depending on who you ask, either went over really well in the Italian community or did not go over well at all with some. I
can't speak for other Italians, but that's funny.
Yeah. So, yeah. And they were a heel tag team, so they weren't, they were already, and wrestling was seen as, if you were a bad guy, you weren't treated well anyway. So.
Not the Italians.
I remember.
The Sicilians, excuse me.
Yeah, and Lou, and I remember Lou Albano talking about it briefly, saying that was, Lou has a litany of horror stories of being attacked by fans throughout his career, but he mentioned the being part of the Sicilians really, really tested him early as far as fan violence and being out on the street. Also, today in wrestling history, the July 10th, 1988. Was the first ever Great American Bash pay-per-view that took place in Baltimore. Again, sensing a theme here, Great American Bash, Baltimore. This was the match that Ric Flair wrestled Lex Luger for the NWA Heavyweight title. Luger had Flair up in the torture rack, and the referee called for the bell. Luger thinking he had won, but in fact, the referee had stopped the match because Luger had been bleeding too much. Never mind that last year at the time, there was blood all over the ring and no matches were stopped. But in yet another attempt for Ric Flair refusing to ever job to Lex Luger wins the match, and Ric Flair keeps the title because the referee stopped the match due to blood. And also on this day, 2010 was Acid Fest, the for tribute to the late great Trent Acid. The card took place in Philadelphia, and exactly 48 miles away on that same date, July 10th, 2010, was the last ever Super 8 tournament put on by the ECWA. Some of the wrestlers that took part in that Super 8 tournament, Nick Dinsmore, who you will know it as Eugene, and the Chris Wilde, and the finals was Tommaso Ciampa losing in the finals to Austin Consequences Creed, who you now know as Xavier Woods.
I will say this. It continued for a couple. Actually, this year's was the last one.
Okay.
What you're saying, it was the last Kettner.
Yes.
It was sold to Mike Tartaglia after that, and ironically enough, next year's champion was... I was trying to lead you down. It was Tommaso Ciampa.
It was Tommaso Ciampa.
Yeah, okay. He came back and won. Yeah, it went for a couple more years. This past year, I guess we can mention it now. This past year was the Generations one. I forgot the name of it, but it was Flying Brian Jr., Ross, and Mark Von Erich.
Mark Von Erich, yeah. I remember we talked about that. Yeah, it was second generation tournament.
And shortly after that, the ECWA announced that they were going on hiatus.
Okay.
It was announced as that, and I will say that's how I will say it, because you never know in wrestling. You never say never. But the
Never.
Super 8, yes, that was the last of the ECWA Classic.
Yes.
Um,
And it took place 9 years ago today.
Yeah. He Tommaso Ciampa won that next year. That's so funny. It was Austin Creed. That's so funny to me. He won in Voorhees that first year at Voorhees, and man, it was a historic episode. No pun intended of the Wrestling Historian this week. Man,
I told you. Yes, we were right. But this week in professional wrestling history was incredibly historic. A lot of great moments. We lost some great people, some horrific injuries, and some memory making firsts.
Hell yeah! And I think we should leave it at that, my friend. Wrestling Historian Plus, we'll call it.
That's what we'll do.
Hell yeah. Craig, what you got coming up this coming week, if anything, other podcast-wise or so?
I do. As luck would have it, Dan, on my other podcast that I do, I talk about all that comic book stuff. My other podcast, Comic Book Gurus, will be giving away tickets to an advanced screening of the Epix TV series Pennyworth.
Ooh.
It's a 10-episode series, but we're going to have an advanced screening of episode 1 next Thursday, and we'll be giving away. We have 25 pair of tickets to give away. We'll be giving away on our podcast and check our social media, our Comic Book Gurus podcast Facebook page, our Comic Book Gurus Twitter page. We'll be asking the trivia question on the other podcast, and first 25 people will get the answer correctly will win tickets to see an advanced screening of the new Epix TV series Pennyworth, about the adventures of Bruce Wayne's butler before he was a butler.
And you can find that podcast at?
Oh, you can find that podcast if you want. Comic Book Gurus podcast. You can find that on WMMR.com, on iTunes, on Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are sold for free.
And where can people follow you, sir, on social media platforms?
If they want to, they can follow me out on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter at Craig Ligons, CraigLigeons.
You can follow the HIAC Talk Radio podcast at HIAC Talk Radio on Facebook and Twitter, part of the VOC Nation Radio Network. The Stadium Journey podcast, the Obey the Puck podcast, all there. VOC Nation, the home of the HIAC Talk Radio Network, VOC Nation Radio. Search VOC Nation Radio on iTunes or go to YouTube/DanLaw83 for the audio podcasts. I've been uploading them copyright infringement free on YouTube. No outros or intros, but the audio edited in nice podcast form. And I've talked to the great Harry Barnett, and very soon on that podcast channel, we will have video companion podcast of this show, the wrestling podcast, the Stadium Journey podcast, Obey the Puck will all be there in video form as well. So just search your search engines, your keyword, your AOL keyword podcast. No, don't do that. I don't think that works. Just look us up or follow me on Twitter at DanLaw83. I'll be retweeting all or typing in all the information there. And please follow, tell everybody, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your mommy. Listen to HIAC Talk Radio. Yes, Craig.
And tell your dad too if you have one.
Tell your dad. You know, tell your aunt. Tell the aunt that you lost after that you want her to listen to this wrestling podcast. I've said too much. For Craig Ligons, I'm the above average comedian, Dan Calachico. We're getting the hell out of here.